So service designers can benefit from systems thinking in a number of key ways. When we think about service design, a lot of the work we do at the front end is around alignment, identifying what the problem is. A lot of the stakeholders we work with, whether it's within government, large organizations, non-profits, for example, startups, they always focus on, in most cases, focus on a section of the problem. They don't think about the whole. So systems maps, looking at cause and effect loops, looking at feedback loops, looking at things such as the iceberg model really helps our stakeholders, but also ourselves understand the bigger picture and the level of complexity that might come into place in a number of different projects I've worked with over time. And being able to support people to understand the bigger picture and have those conversations very early on reduces complexity later down the line, but also reduces the impact of a service design project failing. Because a lot of the work we do within service design is complex by nature because we're involved in the end-to-end process. We think about the front stage, the behind the scene elements, but also the business impact, the policy impact, the data, the structures in most cases. So there's a number of different layers we think about, but also we go end to end. So that invites a lot of complexity and sometimes chaos.
To be honest, it's a very good representation of how the work of service design is. It's not linear. And I think that's where system thinking is very helpful. You always need to zoom in and out, trying to see through different perspectives, think about how one thing impacts the other. As you start to gather more information, things change. It's very dynamic. So I think it's more than tools and methodologies, is very much the mindset of service design and system thinking, and then being super flexible and adaptive, that like things are going to change.
One of the most important characteristics of design thinking and service design is that it has a holistic nature. Whenever we embark on a service design project, we have to take that famous step back to have a broad perspective, which means starting from a strategic understanding before moving to a creative solution. I think that when service design is working in the social innovation realm, when it's working with the delicate and very often intangible social political relations between people and institutions, I think that that's when we are really close to systems thinking and systems change. And that's really when all those methods I mentioned before, from influence models to causal feedback loops, those are the dimensions and contexts when service design and systems thinking are all one.
It's about craft the mindset and seeing it everywhere. Understand your context, understand the people within your context. So then jump into research, but open a little bit your research. Don't focus exclusively about the user. Talk about the other dynamics that are going to relate to this user. And that is when you can jump right away into the techniques and the tools that we have, mapping, like personas, archetypes, etc. But understand the context. Otherwise, you are not taking a systemic perspective to service design. For me, as I said at the beginning, it's like services are the output. This is the end. What happens before you launch the service and while the operation of that service is what matters, because services live in organizations. And very often, organizations follow the mindset that we have as an industrialized society, which is compartmentalizing things. That's not how it works. Everything else in the planet, everything else flows. They cross each other. One system feeds the other system and create negative feedback or positive feedback loops. So for me, the mindset, the structure of the organization, and to be able to deliver the final output, which is the service, all of that need to flow. And it needs to be connected all the way from the mindset to the service. So for me, when you ask me, let's talk about system innovation in relation with service design, they are the same. The design of the service is the output, and system innovation, which I call just the laws of nature, it's just how we should be doing things rather than this chaotic, compartmentalized structure that we built for ourselves.
To me, it's a very specific point, which is there's something that I learned from complexity, which is this idea of ecosystem of solutions. When you do service design, you have a solution. When you apply systems thinking, you need an ecosystem of solutions for you to make like healthier and system that isn't working. So that's what I take it when I move into more traditional ways of doing service design. At the end, I try to have like beyond the service, we are designing an ecosystem of other things that need to happen and support either internally in the company or outside as part of the solution of that service. I've seen it from my experience before systems thinking and after systems thinking. You have that universal solution, and then you learn there's no universal solutions and that the ecosystem of solutions do need to support each other. So I think that's the other part. But I think complementing a little bit what we've been talking, and one of those complexity science principles is path dependence. I think companies do have a lot of path dependence. And I think we as designers are very naive when it comes to this, because we think that we can redesign everything. And there's a lot of path dependence, you know, and there's a lot of attractors that keep the companies going back to their old ways of doing. And so I think that's the challenge. Like, you may have a vision, you may have a very tangible journeys, you may have very tangible like ideas of where you want to take this company or this organization or this service. But we also need, as designers, to understand better the dynamics of the organizations. I think that's where the lack of design education falls.
I see it maturing quite a lot. So service design, depending on the region you work in. So in parts of Europe, service design is very well known. It's becoming a well-established career now. They're teaching it sometimes in undergraduates, or there might be specific master's programs that are specifically focused on service design, which also incorporates systems thinking, which is amazing. So from an academic, but also from a practical side of things, service design is heavily being adopted, which is key. I also want to see it as, it might not happen in the next 5 years, but I want service design to be the norm. And I don't say that as everyone needs to be a service designer, but having those just actual mindsets of, how do you think about the big picture? How do you storytell? How do you empathize with people? How are you actually making and showing your work where you're thinking holistically? How are you empowering and becoming a servant leader over time? These are some of the mindsets anyone can adopt. You can be, let's say, a business analyst. You can be a lawyer. You can be someone that works in finance. You can be anyone across a business. You can work in government. If you have that mindset of being a good service designer, that's really key.
I think service design has an important role to play in influencing the market, policymakers, to the need, but also the benefit that a restorative design brings to the company as well. And restorative, like for the planet, but also people. So rebalancing a bit the society and impacting positively people with like fewer opportunities, especially through like government delivery services and policy making. I think that's where I hope that service design will move towards. And I think it's where the urgency is as well.
Well, there's a lot of discussions about AI, how AI can help and facilitate the process. And I think that's going to happen, you know, it's going to emerge. I see the path of companies doing their own service design, like companies having their own design, like studio that does the service design. My hope is that service design once will get more into complexity. That's my hope. I don't know if that's where the path is going, but hopefully that will happen as well. But I see mostly the discussion about AI.
So we've been talking about design, and you know, if you ask yourself, how did this all start? I mean, if you think of what design was in the 70s, 80s, IDEO, Tim Brown, president of IDEO, would say, in the 80s, 90s, we were all looking at design with a very narrow perspective. We were looking at hedonistic design. But then design thinking was popularized, and many designers today say we've become template designers, because we more and more think that design should be a collective process of all the stakeholders involved, and not just of that lone genius as it used to be. This is still a very recent evolution, but it's certainly where we're moving more and more. What comes next? I think that AI will be certainly an issue to consider in that. I'm already exploring how AI can impact the research phase in working with analyzing, dissecting data sets. Okay. I'm already exploring where AI can take us in terms of ideation, of idea generation, as a co-pilot, of course. The future is where all these things will meet.
I think service design, it's heading into organizational design because they have realized, can we please think about the people? Like, we are doing all of this for certain people. That was the first, I think, like, I don't know, like 20 years of service design. And suddenly, slowly, because we are seeing things more from the systemic perspective, are these things that we build, that we spend millions of taxpayers' money, actually having the impact that we wanted? Do we really need to think of something else? And I think they are thinking about these structures, these invisible structures that before we didn't think about. They were very difficult to intervene, these government institutions, and how they work, how they are operate, how they relate to the policy and the politicians and everything that we dislike so much about all that world, because it's separate from us, and how they take decisions on behalf of all of us. So it's bringing that together. That's why they started creating policy labs to influence policy, to understand how policy is designed, to embed design at the policy level, which is when you are designing something, to then implement it by whatever organization it's designated to implement in a way that actually makes sense. So it's more connected, more holistically. That's why, for example, you hear about the UK government talking about the mission. And that is very much influenced by economists that are thinking about new paradigms for our economy that consider the ecology and the environment and everything else.
I would look at journey management as an upcoming trend. I think it's already more popular in Europe. The second is I would also love to see more service designers becoming more comfortable with change management. And third, service designers getting more comfortable with strategic foresight and how that mapping of trends could actually be useful for the business. Because I've seen strategic foresights doing awesome workshops, and then they create this report, but then how do they sell that to the business? Because the business always, they do not want to disrupt the status quo, and strategic foresight is always disrupting the status quo because it's bringing in a high risk of uncertainty and risk. So how comfortable can service designers straddle that discipline of strategic foresight versus the current business strategy?
Take a course. Go and look who is teaching something. Take a course, do the exercises. It is the best way. And then try to get involved in a company that wants to have a junior to help, because I think you're very raw when you leave school. I did a 2-year master. I don't think it takes 2 years to be a service designer. You could be a service designer in less time. But you do need to take a course. But that's how I am. Some people really like self-learning and so on. I think learning from somebody, taking a course, doing a project, getting advice, like guidance will get you a long, long way.
So it's almost counterintuitive, but try not to read just about service design. Be quite broad in your thinking. I always think about key shifts impacting the world today. I read a lot about politics, the economy, the environment, consumer trends, how different countries view things. Being in the real world will help you gain a bigger context of how things are changing, but also how they're all dependent on each other. So one factor can impact another factor, for example. This will help you not just become a better service designer, because you're not just relying on the standard tools that service designers use, such as the service blueprint. You're going beyond that. You're developing a critical eye on what the world looks like and how we can redesign services. It's almost thinking like an anthropologist. We're looking at different people's behaviors and the way they act and the way they interact with things, and you can take a step back. That's a good way of being a fantastic service designer, but also systems thinker, because you can think about what the people will be impacted by over time. So that's one of the key things that I would always get people to do. Think about the bigger picture and read broadly, not just about service design, but other things around the world.
I think one of the things that actually helped me a lot was trying to see how you can use and apply service design to what you're already doing. The possibilities are innumerous and you can get started now. There are also loads of free resources out there. So I think that's a very positive side of service design that goes beyond like formal education. So it's much more accessible to everyone. YouTube channels, but also, yeah, reach out to professionals. People are very supportive. I think it's one industry where people move from many different backgrounds and everyone is able to contribute as long as you have a human-centric approach.
Look at the problem, see if it's got a systemic component to it, and then learn the basics of system thinking. And I think systems innovation, they have a lot of free resources and paid resources for learning systems thinking. Apply those learnings in determining the problem. The second, I would say, improve your communication skills so that you can collaborate effectively with product management, engineering, marketing, sales, who may not be speaking the same language as you when it comes to solving problems. And third, I would say a very good understanding of change management and how to handle conflicts. The reason I say conflicts is conflicts arise because in most organizations, the design is not a mature practice. So when one is trying to sell service design, there's going to be a lot of conversation saying that I'm not seeing the value, or why is it that certain things have to be done a certain way. That's because probably the organization is less mature or does not know the value of service design. As a service designer, it's upon us to speak that organizational language and say, hey, I am solving problems that matter to you and that move the business needle. How can we resolve conflicts in such a way that we are all part of a team versus designers thinking only they have the power to solve problems?
It relates a little bit where I say about designers being leaders in organizations. The design education has to enable leadership in designers. I think there's a lack of leadership training and understanding the possibilities that we are as more strategic designers, less of a product or graphic, more like into like more strategic world of design. I think there's a chance for companies to leverage what we can offer. I've seen a lack of understanding and opportunities for us. So I think that's the only thing that I think that we, beyond like understanding the tools and understanding the process, I think the way that we, especially service designers, I think that capability of seeing things from a timeline perspective with different dimensions and orchestrating some sort of complexity, I think that could be very useful for leadership roles. I would like to see that too. I would like to see, especially in sustainability, I think corporate sustainability discourse is very into measuring, into regulations, into accounting for sustainability emissions. And I think sustainability is more than that. Designers should play a role in this, and I see a lack of it. I see a lack of understanding, a lack of space, a lack of opportunities, and I would like to see that. Because at the end, like I got into service design for sustainability. I got into complexity science because of design for sustainability. And I feel that there's many like me, and I'm sure there's many people that you encounter that think this way about the role of design in sustainability, and that we could be very helpful. It's just that we are not in the picture, and I talk to these leaders and they don't understand why a designer is talking to them, which is discouraging. So I think that's the last thing I want to say, that service design, complexity systems is ways for us as humans to approach sustainability and the challenges of sustainability. And I think that if we are going to rely, because we are relying in corporate world to solve or mitigate sustainability issues, we're never going to make it. I think that beyond the way that I love to think, and I love being a designer, and I do love service design, and I think it's just so fun. But I think design does have a role that is very important to play at the moment and the future, and we just need to be positioned in that way.
So it's a bit of advice that has come to my mind over time, but try to think about what have you changed your mind about lately? And that seems quite abstract, but I'll try and break it down for you. Every time we are confronted by new things that will change the way we think about the world and think about different scenarios, it's important to reflect about it, to think about how is that going to impact you, but also people around you. There is elements of systems thinking here, but it's also a great way to keep yourself humble, to say the world is changing and you also need to adapt as well. Maybe people have heard of the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. The world is full of these different scenarios. COVID was a big example. All the disruptions in terms of the wars and challenges we're facing in terms of financially, in terms of the economy, that there's VUCA environments. To get around that, you need to make sure you've got a clear vision of the future. You've got a good understanding of how to make sense of the world and your own environment. That involves changing mental models in some cases. But you also need to make sure that you've got some clarity around how to take a step in the right area and the right focus. But also, do you have an action plan in your head or the people around you? And this is where system thinking comes in. Who do you need to bring along the whole process to make sure that you involve the right people across any stage of the journey? So that's one thing to really think about. What have you changed your mind about? And how can that help you be a pioneer in a very VUCA environment?